Hello everybody and welcome to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder. It aims to do this by improving their ability to work together, as well as providing them with methods that can help develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius, and today we are going to continue discussing the draft phase by looking at some methods behind how you should pick your compositions. If you didn't catch the last episode, be sure to click the link on your screen to go check it out. This episode is going to cover basic picking strategies that will be helpful to those struggling to know how to design strong and well-rounded compositions. If you're looking for something a little more in-depth, I would recommend you check out part 3 of this series, as it will be looking at the picking stage in a little bit more detail. Your picking phase can be divided into two separate parts: your early rotations and your later rotations. This may seem a little obvious at first, but let's take a closer look to understand what I mean. Starting with the early rotations. Here, you should aim to pick well-rounded champions that can fit into a number of compositions. By well-rounded, I mean champions that provide a wide array of options to your team. Things like wave clear, the ability to split push, or the ability to engage and disengage a team fight are all great examples of what a champion can offer their team. If a single champion could provide a number of these options, then it can be considered well-rounded. Often, you'll find that the strong meta champions are thought of as such because of how well-rounded they actually are. This is why picking them early is one commonly used method. But just because strong champions are available doesn't mean that you have to choose them. You and your team will have your own strong champions that you value and can be considered strong even if they aren't as meta. The reason behind picking these well-rounded champions early is largely due to 3 different things. The first is that it provides you with the ability to easily adapt to whatever happens throughout the rest of the draft. Secondly is that it allows your composition to be ambiguous, meaning that your opponents can't easily predict what you want to play. And thirdly is that it allows you to deny picks from your opponent that they may want to play themselves. Let's take a look at Game 1 of the PGL's European Qualifier final between Giants under Doges and Millennium. Starting with Giants, notice how they've made Kalista their first pick. She is considered to be a very well-rounded champion because she offers an engage, strong teamfight presence, decent wave clear later on into the game, and relevant at every stage of play. However, notice how many other strong champions are still available. Giants have decided to prioritize the Kalista over something like an Elise because they believe it to be more valuable to their playstyle and preferences. This is very important, as you and your team should always look to do the same thing. Over on the side of Millennium, they open things up with the Victor and the Gragas. Again, both very well-rounded champions due to the wide array of options that they can offer their team. Things such as the ability to wave clear, the ability to engage and disengage a team fight, as well as being relevant to every stage of play, are just a few examples of what these champions can offer. Notice that all of the picks so far are relatively ambiguous. Neither team is showing the composition that they are planning to run. It is also important to note once more that Millennium have chosen to value these picks over other strong picks, and this is because they are comfortable and versatile preference picks. Moving on to Giants' second rotation, they still maintain this idea of picking well-rounded champions, but now you can see a composition starting to be formed. Elise and Braum offer great pick potential, but do not determine the direction of the composition, so there is still room for adaptation. This, however, gives Millennium some information about Giants' composition that they can now respond to, which moves us nicely onto the second half of the picks. The later rotations are where your flexibility should come into effect. Most commonly, you will use these picks to further complement your composition, whether that be to make up for any potential weaknesses that the composition may suffer from, or whether that be to tunnel your composition into something slightly more specific. You can also use the later rotations to try and counter the composition that your opponent is trying to run. Be cautious of this though, as flex picks can often throw a spanner in the works, a topic which will be looked at in more detail in a later episode. To illustrate this, we're going to look at the second half of the draft phase between LGD Gaming and Origin during the World's group stages. What I want you to concentrate on is how LGD choose to tunnel their picks a little more by clearly showing their protect the AD carry composition with the Cogmore. This allows Origin to adapt their composition as their first 2 picks are relatively well-rounded. One method of dealing with a composition that protects a single target is to build a composition that hits everything and everyone. Origin recognise this and pick up the Orianna and Annie, who provide a lot of area of effect damage. Now, we move back to LGD, who have the choice of trying to complete their composition by providing more protection for their AD, or they can choose to try and counter what Origin have chosen while still being viable in their composition. By choosing the Vi and the Malphite, LGD move ever so slightly away from the protect the AD carry composition and become slightly more teamfight orientated, where the Malphite and Vi act as a front line with the Kog'Maw providing consistent damage from the backline. By doing this, they now have options available to them for dealing with this counter composition that Origin have tried to build that was only a slight deviation from their original Protect the AD composition. Origin then close their draft out by doing something similar. They pick a champion that complements their overall area of effect combo composition, but have also created a situation where every single laner has a favourable matchup. This will make it easier for them to build an early lead and prevent Kog'Maw from becoming a lethal threat in the late game. This is an example of teams using these later rotations to adapt and change their plan to fit their composition, deal well with the enemy composition, and pick champions that they are comfortable on. This might seem like quite a lot of information, so I want to recommend that you use a checklist during your draft. Once you've completed your bans, creating a mental or physical checklist to remind yourself of everything that you need to do can make sure that you don't overlook anything significant. Take a look at this basic example checklist that you can use to start with. Number 1, are there any strong champions still available? Here, you should be thinking about whether you want to pick them for yourselves or if you have a potential counter for them in the event that your opponent decides to pick them. Number 2, what do we want to prioritize? Here, you should be thinking about what well-rounded champions that your team is comfortable on and develop from there. Number 3, now that we have our first champions, what composition do we want to run? Now, think about what the enemy has chosen, what possible compositions they could be trying to develop, and what possible compositions could work against that. And number 4, do we have any major weaknesses that we need to address? Things like wave clear, the ability to engage a fight. If your composition is lacking any of these, you should use this opportunity to try and round your composition out. This is just an example, and I would recommend you play around, create your own, and decide for yourself the most important things that you need to remember. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what champions to pick, as it is largely down to your preferences and what is strong in the ever-changing meta. If, however, you use these basic ideas alongside your knowledge and understanding of the game, you will over time come to develop compositions that you enjoy and work for you. You may very well struggle at the start, but that's okay. Consistent practice will provide you with valuable experience that you can learn and develop from. Also, the best teams in the world often make drafting mistakes, so don't get too disheartened if it happens to you too. That concludes this episode of Strategy. If you've enjoyed and would like to keep up to date of any future videos, then feel free to subscribe or check out the other social media links available on your screen. If you have any suggestions for future videos or possible feedback, then please leave them in the comments section below. With that, best of luck on the ladder and have a good one.